Hello, I'm Glenn W. Hunter, and with me today, our subject matter expert, Shor Denny of Community Now. This is the 3 C's of social emotional learning: community, communication, and collaboration. Today, we are here to talk about, wow, it's just something that seems to be sweeping the nation, but we're talking about surviving in our own community. There's violence out there in the streets. Sure. How do we even approach the thought that we have to survive in our own community when you think about our racial climate?
It's frightening right now. It's kind of scary. It's getting more and more intense every day.
And that's just when we think, things are smoothing out. This new wave hits. One of the things I think has been particularly interesting is the Asian profiled violence that is becoming more common across the country. The whole idea of Asian lives matter. You have current protests that are resulting in a fatal police shooting of a Black man in Minneapolis, where the George Floyd trial is taking place. So we still have, violence in the African American community. Sure, what seems to be the trigger for this current wave of violence?
Hatred, racism, supremacy. It's been the same since the beginning of America. In 1790, our Congress declared the United States a white nation.
Mm-hmm.
By doing that, they stated that this land was not for anyone else, right? Except for white people. So when we look at the harm that's being done to the Asian population right now, we can look at that as our former government stoking that hatred, right? That racism, that unrealistic ideal of supremacy that some groups have in our community. Unfortunately, that is close in our community. It can be our neighbors. It can be for our students, the child sitting in the next seat.
And I think what's really unfortunate about this is, as we seem to ride this wave, seems like the violence sort of comes and goes from time to time, and it's less prevalent. I think it's always sort of in the background, but it just seems that it's created so much momentum, so much negative momentum within the last, couple of years, that it's hard for us to really, to use a line from a previous era, that it's harder for us to just plain get along.
Just get along. And in fact, there are some communities that are being pushed to not get along, right? They're being stoked to have this anger and this resentment. And that's what we're seeing in our neighborhoods, in our cars as we're driving, and in our schools. And in effect, this underlying hatred. And then on top of that, you add in a school climate unconscious bias, right? And just the fact that they'll, the just letting it go, sweeping it under the rug, all of this, adds up and is built up to what we have today. And I feel that we're in could be unsafe situation.
Yeah, again, you talk about unconscious bias, which is something that I think our young people are particularly susceptible to, just because they haven't had the life experiences to identify it and address it and resist it. Consequently, once again, this racial tension genie is out of the bottle. So with that in mind, how are kids processing this current wave of racial violence? Because it's right in front of them.
Well, it has been, right? So for the last 600 years, 500, 600 years, it's been right in front of us. For all of this time, we've been, people of color have been dealing with racial slurs, with abuse, with violence, with police killings for the same amount of time. So what we need to be talking about is not, are they seeing it? Are they impacted? But what can we do now? What has changed over the protests, the Black Lives Matter movement, after all of that? Has anything changed, and are we reacting differently in the school environment, in our home environments, or is it the same old, same old? Are Black people just going to say, okay, well, we had our rally and it's over, and we just go back to where it was, how it was before? Or are we going to teach our children, not just that we're equal, but there is a thing of low self-esteem. There is a thing of believing the lie, right? Of falling into, oh, these others in my community who look down on me with disdain and say these hateful things. We've, through all of these years, basically just dealt with it. We've simmered on it. We've internalized it, and we've seen it come out in our youth as self-hatred. So what are we going to do different this time to support our youth and our communities rather than just absorbing the hatred?
Wow. I think that is so pivotal as you're talking about what are we going to do different, because it is going to take a radical change. A pivot's going to have to happen because we're going down a treacherous path right now. And that's not good for the foundation of our country, and it's definitely not good for the foundation of our local community, because we are more in tune with each other than I think we have been previously. We can't hide from it, behind redlining or other vehicles that have been in place.
No, there are many people right now, myself, if you're living in a home and there could be Trump flags flying, your neighbor can be flying it. Some of us find ourselves in the middle of Trump flags, and we're the only house without one. So it's are we living in an occupied territory? How are we supposed to live and interact in this world currently with all of the racial strife? It used to be when this stuff happened, we were segregated. So we were in our own areas, Now we're not segregated. So I'm looking at my neighbors as they're playing out whatever it is they're playing out, and they're looking at me. So how do we play this differently? And again, how do we as brown people come out of this or go through this, not just defiant, but how do we build ourselves so that it doesn't impact us, right? That our babies are not growing up with self-hatred, looking at their skin and thinking they're stupid, or hearing it over and over and believing these things about a whole group of people. How do we stop that?
And I think that is such an important question, because if they're seeing it in their physical community, in the places they live, where they call home, they're going to see it beyond those borders. I mean, as they get out, whether it's, shopping areas or where they're doing their young people's activities, that cloud continues to follow them, and that has to be addressed. But even something as straightforward as the school community, where they have to come. I mean, desegregation is a legal thing. So we are mixing in that environment. And from a school community perspective, how exactly do we equip our youth to offset this latest tsunami of racial tension?
When I was in school, it happened, right? And those who were the agitators, the racial agitators, were never punished. Nothing ever happened. And I assumed, I guess, in my mind that meant that I was the one in the wrong, even though I didn't do anything, right? My skin was wrong, my hair was wrong, so for today with our youth, I think what we need to do is band together. Number one, over the summer, we had all of these protests, and one of the things that we saw is that we have allies. We're not alone. We do have others. And then when we see the racial strife with the Asians and with the Hispanic community, we are all one, and we can band together. So on the school site, there are several things our youth can do to cope. One would be to band together with similar people and with others and start having dialogue. There could be cultural clubs that can be on the campus, to where cultures are mixing and we're starting to see the value and the beauty of each other, not just our differences. We can have students that work together to build alliances and to show the lie that there is no that blacks and browns are just as smart, that we deserve just the same as everyone else, and to not allow it to be internalized and turned into self-hate is the biggest change that we can do. Through time, through time, we've seen Black power movements. We've seen all of these things go on. That needs to be revitalized to where we see the beauty in us. But I think that our youth should see it, and because of the riots and the protests and all of the strife that we've had going on, with those allies, we should be building bridges on a campus. So we need those others, our Caucasian friends, to come on board with us. And I think those are the alliances that need to be made on campus to support our youth and their youth, because it doesn't matter what color you are. What matters is the environment, right? If you go to an all Hispanic school, a white child is the minority. If you go to an all an Asian school, so it's not really, racism is not just one way. And we need to make sure that we are dealing with it in every community, that all are feeling welcome and belong in all communities.
I'm really captured by what you said about, these bridges are essential, because there was a time when a bridge would literally be a physical barrier between one community and another. And you had to acknowledge that. And it's, to your point, it sort of buffered some of the tension, just because it took a geographical leap to engage. But now we tend to start melding a little bit more, and particularly in the Inland Empire, where you have some incredibly rich ethnic cultures, and they do end up interacting. And it's been successful at times, less successful in other times. But I know here there's a pivot that seems to be happening where it's raising that tension. And even though we're not having the necessarily having as explicit or newsworthy violence as we're seeing presented to us by our national media, we still have tension even in the Inland Empire, where there at times hasn't been quite as high. So when you start seeing that, I personally believe our young people need to be at least oriented that there has to be opportunities for them to connect across racial lines, across cultural lines. And that means the adults have to demonstrate that first. As you look at tension that comes up, and if you look at the work that you do, which clearly goes across cultural lines with our young people, well, Shor, what do you think that you're able to do right that's helping them really understand that that's a human being we're dealing with? Let's make sure we're embracing them in that way.
Man, I need more than the time we have left on this show to talk about all that. But what I can say is that our educators need to be looked at as human. Our education system is systematic, and that system has been filled with racism since slavery. When we were segregated, there was still a very unequitable way of dealing with things. The Black schools were very poor and had very bad books and underpaid teachers, where the white schools had the opposite. So what we need to be doing right now is, how do we educate those educators? How do we show them and bring them into this world of culture? And that would be, number one, by talking about trauma and how trauma impacts all of us. And then talking about the real history of America. What really happened here, so that we can all be talking on the same line, and that we can all be impacted by the brutality, the horror, and the just downright unfairness of what happened in the history of America. And then once we can do that and educate them to understand the history and the climate, and to see cultures and the harm that has happened, then they can start to see their youth for youth, and not the stereotypes that they've been sold and that they've been seeing or dealt with them their whole life, or even their educational career, right? So in a school, a whole Hispanic school, again, we go to, in a school full of Hispanic teachers, if you have those one or two other type of students there, those are the students that need to be supported in that Hispanic group. It's not that, and that's the Caucasian culture as well, right? And we tend to forget that. If we're in a all Black school, what other cultures are there? Those are the cultures that need to be supported. So in every environment, there are going to be cultures that need to be supported in our educational system. And the way to do that is to train the teacher, and to build a coaching program to where our teachers can go and get coached. They can go and talk to someone about the strife and what they don't understand, and how to deal with some of their students, and to get that objective outside point of view to help them as they are problem solving and dealing with the youth that, have been given to them in those classes and in that school.
I think it's absolutely outstanding how you talked about, really addressing the cultural friction. I mean, where it is, and making sure that the teachers are aware that they have an obligation to improve as well, to facilitate that particular type of growth so that our children are better equipped to get along. But if I could just ask you to drill just a little bit more specifically, what skills do our teachers need to address the heightened violence in American life?
Emotional intelligence is the first thing that they need, right? We need self-awareness. We need to understand how we can motivate ourselves and others as well. We need empathy so that we can feel how others feel and we fit in their shoes so that we can stop having as much apathy as we have in this world. So it's building those social emotional learning skills, but those emotional skills and those social skills that none of us were taught. Let's just understand. Right now, when you do an emotional intelligence test, everything that you read on there, no one was taught. So what if we did teach people how to be emotionally intelligent? What if we did teach people how to interact on a positive level? And what if we did teach people how to see not only the harm in them, but the harm in others, see each other as human? Look at that child that you see, and maybe you'll see that child, not that their clothes are dirty, but that the child is hungry, right? And maybe you'll see that because that child is hungry, maybe that's why they're doing some of the things that they're doing, hoarding food or things that maybe some people talk about them or laugh at them for doing. There could be causes to this. So what if we taught those educators how to look beyond just what they see and to deal with that small human in a manner, in a humanistic way, in a loving way of, I see you, I see you.
I'll tell you, Shor, the way you articulate that, there's just such a sense of clarity that if we can get that in front of our teachers, our administrators, parents, children, that there is a path to healing. And with that in mind, please tell our audience, how do they get a hold of you? How do they reach you as that kind of solution provider?
You can call us at 951-413-6587. You can email us at ccs@communitynow.info. And you can go to our website, www.communitynow.info. You can comment here, subscribe, share, like, and all of that would be really appreciated. Let us know if there are any topics you want us to talk about, or if you felt anything or have something to say about the conversations we've had. We really enjoy that.
Outstanding, outstanding. So much of it starts with that conversation. So let's continue to push that as part of the healing. But more importantly, Shor, I just have to say thank you for bringing just that insight and that expertise to not just what's happening, but tangible solutions for us to progress through that and really allow, particularly our youth, but all Americans, to really embrace the American dream that is available for all of us to have a sense of prosperity. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your contribution. And most of all, thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Again, I'm Glenn W. Hunter, our subject matter expert, Shor Denny of Community Now, and particularly in these perilous times where there is such tension and strife, I want to urge each and every one of you, please be safe. Thank you.